Most people at this podcast are famous. You know their names before they sit down. Today is different. Today's guest is a shipyard worker from Hamburg, Germany. He was not a philosopher, not a general, not a king. He never wrote a book or gave a speech. He did one thing, and he did it quietly, in a crowd, with no audience in mind. His name is August Landmesser. Welcome.
I am not sure I belong here.
That's exactly why you do. August, I want to show you something.
Sure.
Do you recognise this?
Yes. The shipyard. June 1936. The launch of the Horst vessel.
That's you, arms crossed, everyone around you, hundreds of people, arms raised, saluting. And you're just standing there.
I did not know anyone had photographed it. Not until much later.
So in that moment, you weren't making a statement. You weren't performing for anyone.
I was thinking about Irma. Hitler was there. The man who had made it illegal for me to marry the woman I loved, who had taken everything from us, was standing 20 meters away. And they expected me to salute him. I could not do it.
Tell me about Irma.
I met her in 1934. She was Jewish. In 1935, we tried to register our marriage. They denied us. The Nuremberg Laws. They said our love was a crime. They called it Rassenschande, racial disgrace. We had a daughter, Ingrid. We tried to flee to Denmark in 1937. They arrested us at the border.
And then?
I was sent to a concentration camp. Irma was arrested by the Gestapo. She was pregnant with our second daughter, Irene. She gave birth in prison. The last letter I received from her was in January 1942. They took her to Bernburg. She was among 14,000 people killed there. I never saw her again.
I'm sorry.
I was released in 1941. In 1944, they drafted me into a penal battalion. I went missing in Croatia, so I did not have a happy ending either.
August, I need to ask you something directly. You joined the Nazi Party in 1931.
Yes, I needed work. Germany was in ruins after the war. The party promised stability. I was young and desperate, and I did not think clearly enough about what I was joining. I am not proud of it.
What changed?
Irma. When you love someone, truly, abstractions become people. The law was not a policy anymore. It had a face, her face, and then it became very simple.
And the punishment, just to be clear for anyone watching, it didn't come from that photograph. They never connected the photo to you while you were alive.
No, the photo was nothing. What they punished me for was loving Irma. Trying to marry her, trying to build a life with her. That was the crime, not the crossed arms, the love.
Which makes it even more devastating. You didn't pay for a gesture. You paid for something that should never have been anyone's business but yours.
The state decided it was their business. That is what states do when they are not kept in their place. They expand into your home, into your bed, into who you are allowed to love.
That's the thing I want to stay on. Because most people in that crowd, they weren't monsters. They were workers, fathers, neighbours, people who convinced themselves that following the law was the same as doing the right thing. How could a person rationalize something like that?
You tell yourself it is safer to go along, that one person cannot change anything, that the consequences are too great, that perhaps the law is wrong, but the moment is not right to say so. And then the moment passes, and then another. And suddenly you have spent years saluting something you know is evil because each individual moment felt too costly to resist. And the people making the evil laws are counting on exactly that calculation.
I want to read you something. An American writer, Henry David Thoreau, wrote this in 1849. He never knew you. He died decades before you were born. But he wrote, "Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison." Does that mean anything to you?
He said that in 1849?
1849.
Then men have always known, it is not a new idea, that there are laws which must not be obeyed, that when a government becomes unjust, compliance is not neutrality, compliance is participation. I did not know this man's words, but I knew the feeling. You reach a point where following the law costs you something more important than safety. It costs you yourself. And once you understand that, truly understand it, you realize that disobedience is not rebellion. It is the only honest response.
Thoreau also wrote that a man's first obligation is to his conscience, not to the law. That the law has never made men more just. That it takes a man to make the law just.
Yes, because the law is written by men, and men are capable of great evil when they are afraid, or hungry, or when someone convinces them that their cruelty is necessary. The law does not have a conscience, only men do, and when a man surrenders his conscience to the law, he has surrendered the only thing that makes him different from a machine.
So what breaks the calculation? What makes a man keep his arms crossed?
Something that costs more than compliance. For me, it was Irma. For someone else, it might be different. But I think, beneath all of it, it is simply the question of who you are when no one is watching. I did not know about the photograph. There was no record, no reward. I just could not raise my arm. That is all it was.
But that's everything, because the system depends on everyone raising their arm. One man who doesn't, even silently, even anonymously, is a crack in the wall.
I do not know if I was a crack in anything. I was just a man who loved his wife.
The photo wasn't published until 1991, 55 years later. Your daughter Irene identified you. The world found out your name. Does that matter to you?
It matters that Irene knew, that my daughters knew what their father was. The world. I did not do it for the world. I did it because I could not look at myself otherwise.
Last question. There are people watching this right now who are in their own version of that crowd. Maybe it's not as dramatic. Maybe it's a workplace, a family, a country, moving in a direction they know is wrong. Everyone around them has their arm raised. What do you say to them?
I say, you already know. That is the hardest part and the most important part. You already know. You do not need someone to tell you that the law is unjust. You feel it. The question is only whether you trust that feeling more than you fear the consequences. And I will tell you what I learned. The consequences of compliance are longer and heavier than they appear in the moment. You do not pay once. You pay every morning when you look at yourself. Keeping your arms crossed costs something, but it costs less than the alternative. Believe me.
August Landmesser, a shipyard worker from Hamburg. No book, no speech, no army. Just a man in a crowd who kept his arms crossed and showed us that conscience is not a philosophical concept. It is a choice, made once, in a moment, when no one is watching. See you tomorrow.